Hi everyone, my name is Hassan and in this video we are going to talk about SideCar pattern. SideCar pattern comes under many categories of cloud design patterns, like design and implementation, operational excellence, and data management. And this pattern is all about deploying certain modules of your application in a separate process or a separate containers to be totally isolated from your primary application, but at the same time, they can interact and provide additional functionality to your application. And we are going to see this in more details in this video. It's good to know that the ambassador pattern is very close and related to the SideCar pattern, and we have previously done a video for the ambassador pattern, and I'm going to put a link for the ambassador pattern if you are interested to review it. Before we dive into the examples, let's first understand from where the name comes from. SideCar name came from motorcycle world, where you have the motorcycle and you have a sidecar. You can attach the sidecar, deattach it, upgrade it. It's a totally separate component from your motorcycle. And if we are going to reflect this into our world, we will see that the motorcycle is going to be our primary application. That consists of the core functionalities of our system. And then in the sidecar, we are going to have the additional modules that are not part of the primary or core application, but they are still important to complement our application with additional functionalities and features. This is just to give you a little bit of idea from where the name comes from. Now let's dive into the example to help us understand this pattern better. Let's assume that the core functionalities or core services of our primary application consists of three services: client service, transaction service, and cache service. And we are going to have an additional modules which are not actually part of our core functionalities of the primary application, but they are important to complement our application and make it enterprise level. We are going to need a logging mechanism, configuration management, and a proxy as well. And by having these three modules implemented and hosted in the primary application, this is exactly the problem that we are trying to avoid. Because in case of any error happen in these modules in the runtime, it's going to affect the primary application, because usually both of them are going to be running on the same process, right? Also, the second challenge we have in here, by having all of these modules implemented as part of the primary application, is that it restricts us to write all of these modules with the same language as the primary application. And assume that if you have 10 different applications in your organization and you want to implement these three modules in all of these applications, you will have to duplicate these three modules across all applications in your organization, especially if they have been written with different languages. So this is the second challenge as well. And we might think that a quick fix for this problem might be to pull out these three modules and put them in a separate service. Then we are going to communicate between this new service and the primary application. But this is not going to be efficient, because by doing this, we are going to add some level of dependency between the services of our primary application and the new service that we have just created. So those are the different sort of challenges that we are facing if we try to host all of these three modules within the primary application. Now let's see, how can we use the SideCar pattern to resolve these problems? And what we are going to do is to host the primary application services in a separate container, and then pull out these three modules and host them in a separate container. Let's call it SideCar. And then we are going to have some sort of communication between the primary application and the SideCar. And by doing this, we have kind of resolved all of the challenges we have talked about before. Now the SideCar is running in a separate container, separate process, totally isolated from the primary application. In case any error or any corruption happened to the SideCar container, it wouldn't affect our primary application at all. Also, we should be able to use the SideCar container with all applications in our organization, because what we need to do is just to connect SideCar container with the primary application or any application we want to connect to it. And one important thing you need to know about is the SideCar container is very linked to the instance of the primary application, exactly similar to the motorcycle. We cannot share one SideCar across multiple motorcycles. It's not going to work. What's going to happen here, if we have more than one instance of our application, what we are going to have is to host multiple sidecar containers. Each of them is dedicated to one instance of our application. This is to ensure that each of our application instances is communicating and have a dedicated sidecar container that can coordinate with it. And also, one of the benefits of using the sidecar, if we decided to change the logging mechanism, instead of logging to a file, we are going to change the logs to applications in Site. And what we are going to do in this case is to change our repo and change it to write the logs to application in Sites. And then when we want to initiate or create a new container from our sidecar repo, it's going to create all containers using the application in Sites logging rather than the file logging. Sidecar pattern is very common in container world, especially in Kubernetes. Sidecar is very well-known pattern in Kubernetes world. Now let's talk about some considerations you need to keep in mind when you use this pattern. First of all, the deployment or packaging. You need to think of how are you going to deploy or package the sidecar container to be deployed or packaged with your primary application instances. Also, it will be really helpful for you if you are going to implement or develop your sidecar container using a language or a framework agnostic technology. This will allow you to use it across multiple applications. Also, before you go ahead and implement or put a certain feature in a sidecar container, you need to think a little bit what else might be more efficient. Is it going to be better for you if you are going to host these features as a separate service, or maybe as a traditional daemon? Or in some scenarios, just to use a simple library, or a traditional extension mechanism. All of these might be a replacement to the sidecar. In other words, sidecar container shouldn't be the only way to go if you want to pull certain modules out from your primary application, and you need to think carefully before you go ahead and put certain containers or certain modules in a sidecar container. Now let's see when you should use this pattern. When your primary application consists of a set of different languages and frameworks, and then the modules you are going to put in the sidecar, it's going to be consumed by all of these languages and frameworks within your primary application. Also, when you have a certain component developed by a remote team and you want to use it in your organization, then it will make more sense to put it in a certain container to be consumed by your primary application. Also, when you have a certain component that must be located in the same host as your primary application, sidecar will be the perfect implementation for this scenario. Also, when you want to independently update modules in your sidecar without affecting any modules in your primary application, this would be perfect for you to implement sidecar pattern. Now let's see when you shouldn't use this pattern. If the latency between the primary application and the sidecar cannot be tolerated, because we already know that we should expect a little bit of a latency when we pull out some modules from the primary application and put them in a sidecar and having the communication between them, there is a little bit of latency. And if your application cannot tolerate this latency, you shouldn't use this pattern. Also, if your application is very small, don't bother and implement this pattern. It's gonna add more complexity to your system and you wouldn't feel the benefit of this pattern. Also, if you have a different scaling requirements between the primary application instances and the sidecar instances. As we've already said, the sidecar is very linked to the primary application instances. If you are going to launch a new primary application instance, you are going to have a sidecar container being created for you as well. And if you have a different scalability requirements between the primary application and the sidecar containers, you shouldn't use this pattern. Now we are coming to the end of this video. I hope now it's clear for you what the sidecar pattern is about, where the name was coming from, when you should use this pattern, when you shouldn't, what are the different considerations you need to keep in mind when you implement sidecar pattern. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments below, and thanks for watching.